But like when I first started in the journey, and it's still something that I think Hashem uses as a strengthening mechanism with the Yesahara to not look at it from a haughty standpoint. You know what I mean? Be like, man, I'm waking up at this time. I'm studying for Zodiac, da 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 da, and like, really, who are you? But in reality, it's like I feel sympathy for people who like everything that they're going after is transitory. It's not even real. You know what I mean? Like I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, listen, the fact that for the last what was it, 2025? Ooh, 5 years for sure. No question with certainty that you light Shabbat candles every Shabbos, every Erev Shabbos, like that's gonna be the greatest accomplishment of your life. When you
Amen.
leave here, like when we transition, we're going to leave. That's a guaranteed fact. That's gonna go before you. And I'll tell like everyone that you're connected to who have never really committed, done a mitzvah. Now people are like, well, if you just live a good life. I'm like, yeah, no, that's fine. Yes, live a good life. Live a great
What
life.
does that mean,
What
live
does
a
it
good
mean?
life?
Rob, it makes me think why I remember hearing some rabbis. This was years ago, and it was like on YouTube, and they were like, the goyim are like dogs, and people are just going crazy. They think we're dogs. Ah, ah. I was like, nah, but when you really think about it, like I have a dog. He does everything he's supposed to do, like as a dog. You know what I mean? Like he's happy, he's sad, he's just living as a dog. But when I think about my existence, my whole existence is to perform mitzvahs. My whole existence is to connect to Hashem. My whole existence is and everything I do is kavanah. Every single thing. Before I drink this glass of water, shekel, l'chaim. You know what I'm saying? When I wash my hands, I'm ritually doing them. When I'm eating my food, I'm studying Torah. Every single thing. Rob, we're learning yesterday. The Ram Call is bringing out how the worlds are stacked with the Kav going. It's like what? Like when I think about that though, it's like when you look at someone who's not performing their design, you were designed a certain way and you're not. The manuscript you haven't even opened at all. Yeah, people will look at you from a certain standpoint because it's like a sympathy. Like I have sympathy for my. You get what I'm trying to say, Rob.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Well, it's just to say that, it's just to say that, the life without serving God exclusively in the way that God explains to us in the five books of Moses and expressed in the Tanakh, that it's just like, we're in this world to transform and elevate our neshama. And our way of doing that is by elevating the life that God gave to us. So when people say a good life, what they're saying is they're in the reality of the external self, which is a world based around pleasure, right? And so when there's no corrective mechanism from the soul, meaning that even if I have a day that's difficult, even if I have a day that's full of like physical pleasure, it doesn't matter because both days are Baruch Hashem because this is what my soul needed in order to transform itself. Right? This is what my soul needed. So there's never a good day, a bad day. Every day I'm winning. Every conversation I'm winning. Everything. Even if I'm hurt, even if I'm disappointed, even if a relationship didn't work out, right? Or a business deal didn't work out, or whatever it is, something that I see as a challenge, right? That is part of the correction process. That's what Ram Call is giving us. Ram Call is showing us that no, look at today. Right now, it's midday for me, right? So look at the day and see the day from the context of see the day from the context of Hashem revealing and concealing the perfect amount of light that you need to achieve whatever correction you need on that particular day. Some days God's presence, like Yom Kippur, different times, like God's presence is so much more clearer than it is other times, like maybe the ninth of Av, right? And so, and so, and so from that perspective, That's what we're experiencing, right? That's what we are, making sense of is this dynamic of this reality that's totally designed for our success, totally designed for us to, move forward, it's totally designed for that, right? But at the same time, it hurts sometimes. It feels difficult. So people say good life, you can have, I mean, Hansel and Gretel, right? That's the best example, right? It's like Hansel and Gretel were these two characters that went to a house and they got stuffed of food full of pleasure. And at the end, they became the food, right? So the good life concept is just saying like you're basically saying, no, we don't have a soul. And we only have an external self. In that external self, the way that I understand the external reality is based off of pleasure. So the more pleasure I receive, the better my life is. So I got to go to a vacation. I got to go to a spa. I got to get the new outfit. I got to buy the new thing. I got to do this because everything's about physical pleasure. And I've been told that physical pleasure is how I determine a life that's valuable versus a life that's not. And that's it. And once you buy into that, you're finished. Game over. Next lifetime. Come back next time and maybe you'll meet people of wisdom, and you'll see like, no, no, that's not what life is about. Life is about me transforming, me changing my midot. And that pleasure and that confidence and that elevation that comes from those experiences, that's what shapes me. That's what shapes me. Not the new iPhone, right? Not the, salary, right? But it's the fact that I'm able to love in a new way. I'm able to share in a new way. I'm able to empathize in a new way. I'm able to give in a new way. I'm learning things about myself I never knew existed. Why? Because I'm infinite. I am also the Ein Sof. All the infinite dynamics of the Ein Sof exist in me. So I want to spend this time getting to know me, not you. You know what I'm saying? I don't need to know your. I need to know what's going on with me. And by me doing that, I connect to you. I'm not separate from you. I connect to you because you are me. Your inner essence is me. My inner essence is you. But the only way I could connect to you is by knowing me. Right? And that's what we want to connect to, that aspect of the neshama. And that aspect of the neshama, that aspect of the neshama is the basis of me knowing who I really am. And not saying that we'll fully understand it, but the more we get into contact with it, the more that we understand that we're here to serve it, the more that we understand that we're here to transform this external self, right? And that's why we're learning this wisdom of the Ramchal. Like the Ramchal is literally going and showing us how the process of what we experience and how to see prophecy. This is like one of the biggest hidden saphers, right? It's fun, It's just like this is like a huge thing. So let's go into it. Um, okay, okay, all right. So yeah, so let's go into it. But yeah, but this is a perspective. It's just saying like this is reality, and that's the thing when we talk about like Yeshiva Sanhedrin, and that's moving into this reality of yes, obviously there's a connection with the African Americans. Obviously there's connections with people from Spain. There's connections with Asian people and India people and all these different connections for sure. But you know what matters is our connection to each other. And the only way that we can build a society that can even talk about what unity means on any type of a level, even if it's just a critical mass of people, is through the discovery of the neshama and building around the neshama. And not only that, we're talking about a new perspective on industry. If I accept that I have a soul and I have a body and they both have needs, when I do architecture, what does the architecture look like? Right? If I'm making food, what type of food? I got to inquire. What is the soul? What is the basis of the soul? And you know what? For some reason, we have exclusivity of that understanding. Okay. All right. So it says Hasfiro to Nerot. Okay. So he says, the form of which the Sphirot appears spiritual. He says, the form in which the Sphirot appears spiritual, yet even this is not part of their incentric essence, but only the form in which they appear when seen through looking through the glass of Malchut. Okay, so he's saying that, he says, looking at reality from the frame of Malchut, he says we when we have this vision. So okay, so one level is the image itself, right? The image itself that comes that the prophet sees. That image itself is representing a specific spiritual quality. That specific spiritual quality is referred to as a sphirot, right? And so that spirot is where the prophet gravitates and evolves his attention and connection to is to the sphirot, right? And the sphirot is expressed through the image. So he's saying, but even when a person connects to the sphirot, the prophecy of the sphirot, he said that this sphirot that looks like has a spiritual expression, he's saying even that expression itself is he says yet even if this is not part of the essential essence, but only forms in which they appear seen through the lenses of Malchut, right? So looking through it from the frames of Malchut, we're seeing it. So that means that everything that we see spiritual, we have to understand the perspective of which we're looking, right? And the perspective of which we're looking is from the frame of Malchut. He says, FLP, even out, Shani Reim. So he says like this. He says, although the spherot appear in form of likeness, even so, the form seen is not like a physical form. What is seen is something that is understood as if one saw that the form in the lower world. This is called the vision of the soul, whose vision is not like the vision of the body. Accordingly, the subject of accordingly the subjects of the prophetic vision do not seem the prophetic vision do not necessarily appear in the same way as the corresponding physical objects would appear to the physical eye. So he's basically saying like there's no limitation. There's no limitation. He's basically saying like the prophetic visions, although they may have a lot of similarities to what we see physically, they're not the same. He says, accordingly, the subject of the prophetic visions do not necessarily appear in the same way as a corresponding physical objects would appear to the physical eye. What is seen by the soul is a shiny light that is understood as a circle, the eagle. If what is seen is a circular or as a straight line, yashar, if what is seen in the vision is straight, the same applies to all the other forms or images seen by the soul. It is not that the actual physical form is seen, even the spiritual form that is seen is not of the eccentric essence of the Sphirot themselves, but only a way to appear through Malchut, which shows these powers in this way. That's big. It's big. It's like a recalibration of perception of sight, right? Everything we see is coming from the frame of Malchut. But that doesn't mean that that's its total essence, right? אחר שבי ארנו, הנעים מהדמי בנות. Shebi Sphirot. So he says, having explained the form in which the Sphirot appears, we will now explain how even this vision is not the vision of a physical form. Kalach. So he's saying like they're saying this whole idea like now that he's saying the commentary is explaining that what he's going to do now, he's going to explain that the physical form, he says, having explained the form in which the sphere appears, We have now explained how even the vision is not vision of a physical form. So even what you're seeing is not physical, right? It's like you see a vision of, say, maybe an owl or a chariot or this or different things. It may seem, or you may comprehend it as a physical expression, but it's not. It's from a different dynamic. So what he's going to do now is, I guess, explain this manifestation of these two parts, right? The proposition of the two parts is part A is through the spherot. The form in which the spherot appear are not like the physical form. So that's kind of like what he touched on already. And the second part is even the spiritual form that is seen, even this subtle form is not eccentric to the spherot, but was purposely chosen. אף על פי שנראים הדמיונות בספרו, אף על פי כן אינה נראות צריך. So he's saying like this, although the spherot appeared as forms and likeness, even so the form that appears is not like a physical form. Thus, Moshe said to the children of Israel, "For you did not see any form." It says in Deuteronomy. It says, "For this certainly is for this it is certainly impossible that the supreme glory would appear even symbolically in any form or likeness whatsoever. For even the soul has no physical form whatsoever, let alone the supreme glory." He says, "It is therefore." He says form like, you know, he says it is there because we know it has 613 parts. He says there is therefore not a possible. He says there is not possible that the physical form of a lion or an ox or a man or a circle or straight line would appear in the upper realms. Right? So now he's giving you your prophecies. He says, "Thus is written, but you saw no form, only a voice." The visions we are talking about is the vision of the soul, which means understanding rather than vision in the physical sense. The soul does not see what it sees as external physical form. Rather, the prophet's soul gains insight into the true spiritual essence of what he sees, after which his intellect forms a mental picture or image of it. If one could see into the prophet's soul, one could see the subtle mental or spiritual picture there. So that was big. Kind of like reaffirming kind of like what we're saying about this idea of the things, how the prophecies are explained in the physical realm is not how they're being explained in other higher worlds. So when we hear about, like he says, when we hear about the physical form, he says it is therefore impossible that the physical form of a lion or an ox or a man or a circle or a straight line would appear in the upper realms. You know, so it's like when it says Hashem extended his right hand and took Klal Israel out of Mitzrayim, like these types of things. It's like we're not talking about physical forms, right? Because it would have to be a corresponding same thing in the spiritual realm, right? And we see clearly that, you know, this is that in the it's just a shemei amar shehiye mahashekhala mitzvah. He says mitzvir. Okay, he says if you say that the intellect forms a mental picture of something seen by the soul in some physical form, he says if what you say the intellect forms a mental picture or something seen by the soul in the physical form, it is not so. What the soul sees are the powers of the spiritual realm arranged in a certain order that is expressed in the form in which the soul sees them. He says, so when you're seeing somebody, you have the physical eye that sees somebody that's connected to the human intellect, and then the soul is able to perceive as well. So he's saying when the prophet receives the image or the vision, that they're able to see on the intellectual level, they see a physical image, but on a level deeper than that, their soul is also seeing, but it's only seeing the powers that are making this physical substance appear. Okay. So he says what the soul sees are powers, or the spiritual realms arranged in a certain way to express in a form in which the soul sees them. For example, the soul may have a perception of God's overall general providence as opposed to his individual providence over the details of creation and translate this perception into the form of a circle. He just explained it to you. He just explained to you the circle right there. So basically, the concept of the Yigulim is this idea that, for example, the soul may have a perception of God's overall general providence. So you see the greatness in the providence of over God, over the general structure. And he says, he says the providence he's the providence over the details of a certain of creation. He said, this is the circle. Thus, the spheroids are seen as lights arranged in a spiritual order in which as they form a circle. You hear that? Or as a straight line. The spheroids may break through or ascend or descend in various ways. Ooh, he just explained the straight line. He says that, and he says, not this is the actual form it takes, but this is how we can understand it. So this is the big thing, right? So we understand the Yigulim, which is the circle, and we understand now the straight line. The Yigulim is the overall governance of God's providence, right? It's like you have like that with that big line or whatever they're called around the planet Earth, whatever ozone layer, whatever it is, right? So you have this overall governance over all of existence and even the details. That is the circle. Then you have this idea of the elevation of things going up and things going down, right? In madrigal, in levels. This is called Yashar. This is called Yashar, the straight line. He says the spheral may break through. He says the spheral may break thin or descend in various ways. So this is a straight line. He says Ele nerada enayim echad shemu ven bo. So he says like this. So this he says what is seen is something that is understood as if one could see the form of the lower world. This is called the vision of the soul, though whose vision is not like the vision of the body. Oof. He says, in other words, the soul itself understands what it sees. The vision of the soul itself is not like the vision of the physical eye, for the God's glory cannot be seen by the physical eye. According, it needs to be pictured other than it need not be pictured other than in forms appropriate and relevant to the vision of the soul that beholds it. The soul sees things as they actually are, not as some external physical form. So we got to ask Hashem to let us see with our souls. Now we're learning the soul actually has what we would call sight, right? But the soul doesn't see the physical things. The soul sees the essence. So we have a spiritual eye, I guess, if you want to call it. He says, Ule ken ein sirik. So he says, according to the subject of the prophet's vision, do not necessarily appear in the same way as the corresponding physical eye would appear as a physical object would appear to physical eye. What is seen by the soul is a shining light that is understood as a circle. The idea of the all-encompassing governance of Hashem over every aspect, the light basically behind it. If you've seen it as a circle or as a straight line, if what is seen in the vision is straight, the same applies for all the other forms or images seen by the soul. It is not that the physical form itself. So that's big. If I read this correctly, he's basically saying that the idea of circular structures and straight structures represent two different spiritual experiences. One is the overall, like the aspect of the light forces connected to all the different details of creation, and it's talking about that relationship. Maybe you could say that's in the frame of God, judgment or mercy. And then you can say that there's another aspect that if you see images that are elevating and descending or elevating, that it has to do with the ascending or descending of something based off of their own actions, if that makes sense. Afilu lahanirot. So he says in part two, he says, even the spiritual form is seen not in its intrinsic essence of the spheres themselves. For the creation are two kinds, physical and spiritual. Each have their own respective forms, but Hashem's glory is not eccentric, possess either of these two kinds of form. It may, however, appear through such forms through not enough physical form, which is gross, but in spiritual form, which is fine and subtle, it appears or seen in the same way as it appear or seen in the mind. So basically, like when we comprehend things, we have to understand that the final level of comprehension is through the intellectual mind, right? And the intellectual mind is based off of a limited experience, which is the physical expression of the light. But he's saying that beneath that physical expression is just the light, right? And so we have to understand that these are the two experiences. Ah, kafilu ze adian adian inu enain. He says even what is seen is not actually divine powers themselves. This is obvious. Or whoever wants to know the power in their eccentric essence would have to know the godly the god the god the godliness in an eccentric itself, because the spheros are pure godliness. And since the essence of the godliness cannot be known at all, it is impossible for us to know the essence of the spheros. Whatever is known of the spherot is only because it is permitted to see them in this way, not because they are actually this way eccentrically. It's crazy. It's kind of like a relationship with a woman, right? It's like you think you know what I'm saying? You think you know what I mean? But you only know what you're able permitted to see. So don't think even when you connect to the spiritual essence, don't think you're connecting to the essence. You're just connecting to the skin of the apple. He says, "Ele be sadur malakut." So he says, in the form that they may seen. He says, only way they appear through malkut, which shows these powers in this way. Through powers constitute the order through which the creation is governed. The supreme will not only wanted that this should be this way in order governing its lower creation. These being governed, but also that the order of government should be able to be seen in and through the lower creations themselves. So not just like he's showing this transparency of connection. He says the creative realms and their inhabitants are designed in such a way to show and illustrate God's system of government in the very form they take. He says, they are just as, he says, they're just as many creations as there are parts of the system of government. Thus, each of the individual powers, each constitute the overall system of government, produced a creation that emerged from it and which provides a visual congruent. I don't know, it's not congruent. Anyway, it provides the conjugate power that its very form and structure qualifies as attributes. So it's just basically showing that even though the physical mirrors the spiritual, by no means is the physical itself the spiritual. It's an expression of spiritual, and by no means is the spiritual that we connect to are we understanding its essence. He said there must be something between the channels of the law of government in such a way that they are visible and manifest in creative realms themselves, causing different powers to appear in the form of an ear, of a mouth, of an apple, of this. So this is this idea of these kalim, all these kalims that exist in the world, and how Hashem's light force expresses these kalims in unique ways. So this kalim is an apple. This kalim is a tree. This kalim is your wife. This kalim is your workmate. This kalim is a building. Whatever it is, but all these things are expressions are capsules that when Hashem's light enters them, which is like every second, they give off this physical expression. He says there certainly must be a light that has the power to translate the expression of the system of government through imagery in this way. Vehine kol zehu be malakut. So he says, and all this comes through the attribute of malchut, which is allusion to the verse, and behold, this likeness of God. Malchut is called the likeness of God because this is the attribute that produces the spiritual forms or the likeness of the spirits appears. So this quality of Malchut is where these spiritual qualities come to be physical. He said the attribute of Malchut is in the root of all the lower realms and the source of the whole essence, and it is through the attribute of Malchut that laws of God's government are seen in the forms taken by the bodies of creation in the lower realm. But there are on levels of Malchut, but he said, but there are levels of Malchut in itself. He says the form of the spiritual, because everything descends gradually, level by level. He says the spiritual form is inscribed in the attribute of Malchut, and it is from there that the material form later emerges. So he's showing this process of like how things that are spiritual emerge and ultimately become things physically. So he says human beings do not have the power to apprehend the spiritual lights except in the way that they in which they choose to relate themselves in the lower realm. So this relationship between the lower and the physical determines how we relate to these lights. And he says, as much so that the supernal lights or roots are formed in a lower realm and therefore relate to them. Thus, we humans perceive the spheroids only through the lens of Malchut, which shows us the supernal lights in their mode of governments through imagery. He says, accordingly, let him that the glory in this Hebrew zot that they understand and know me. He says, these here are the words, this zot alludes to the attribute of Malchut. Ooh. And he says, and only in this way is it possible to obtain my perception at all, and this will be discussed further below. Okay, Mazel Tov, chapter 9, we finished it. It's also humongous. Any thoughts, reflections? Ugh.
Baruch Hashem, it makes you think about the purpose of anthropomorphisms, like just for us to be able to understand in like in the initial steps of comprehension of Hashem. Like without anthropomorphism, like the hand of God or God's a man of war, or, these things it's for us to relate to. It's like Hashem created this system for us to connect to Him to understand. So it's like He lowered it for us to get it. Like the hand of God. It's like okay, obviously, but He comes back and tells us there is no form. So this is clearly a initiating tool for you to be able to approach. You know what I mean? Like, because intellectually we should think about it and say, okay, hold on. Obviously, there's no limit to Hakadosh Baruch Hu. There can't be. So this modality of speech is really for us to be able to connect to a concept that takes us to the next level. I mean, because like even when you think about like Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, He created God. Is one way you can interpret that. Like He created God. Like Elohim, Teva, nature, like the externality Hashem created. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. Like He created that externality but it's an initiating factor for you to understand. Like you couldn't exist without the external. You know what I mean? Like if Adam and Saba didn't fall, like we don't understand the form of this reality. Like all that was strategically placed. Now, did they have Bakira? Did they have free will? Absolutely, they did. They could have chose not to do that. But it was designed for the progression of humanity, for us to progress and understand Hashem. Like darkness precedes light. Without, on a simple level, without darkness, you don't even appreciate light. You don't even know what light is. Light doesn't exist without darkness, in a sense, because you can't appreciate the contrast. Where's appreciation? So it's like There's a verse in Psalms. I need to find it. I think it's in the 84 Psalms, but it's a Kabbalistic approach, a Kabbalistic lens on one verse. I think it's 84:9, and it's like Hashem, and then it's like Elohim. It's like the two names together, and it's like Hashem is like the sheath for Elohim. You know what I mean? Like the covering of it in a way. And I was like, or maybe the other way around, Slika. So it's like everything that we're like what the Rome call is bringing out, he's really recalibrating our way to see reality. He's giving us the compass, the coordinates to really understand where you are and why you are. And it's like the external factors of this reality are like I don't know what's the word to use. It's like it's very simple almost. You know what I mean? Like you get caught up. Okay, you feel pleasure. Yes, yeah. Hashem gave you that feeling. Why though? Why do you have such a love for your parents or your wife, your spouse, your husband, whatever? Why do you have such love? Like, what is that love? Where does it originate from? Like that's the purpose to investigate that. And once you investigate that, it's like, oh, okay. So everything connects back to one source, and these different kalim, these different modalities that we experience are just all to give us better direction and sense of where we come from, and to create that longing of the soul, that yearning to return back to that in a sense. Like Nadav and Abihu, that yearning, even Korach, you can say the yearning they had to be connected to Hashem. Now it's getting there correctly though. It's not deviating at all, because there can't be any deviation. I think that's the part that all humanity has to understand. Like this ain't no game. It's like once there is nothing but Hashem, nothing. Like there's nothing else. There can't be anything else. Everything else is just a mechanism to for you to understand that there's only one. So all these different forms are really no, they're not different forms. They're one form, but it's to help you to see it incorrectly. So that's what I'm thinking about, Rob.
Yeah, man, I think it's a very important point, and along with that, you could see through this teachings that we're getting from the Ramchal, blessed memory, um, that you could see how misguided Christianity is, and how people just looked inside of the Torah on a very superficial level, and they understood prophecies, they understood these, and they just look at it just from this standpoint. They're reading it, and they're in complete error. And you see why there's no light can come down from that spiritual mechanism. It's not rooted in truth. It's not rooted in the understanding. It's not just tradition for the sake of tradition. This is the mechanism of how we understand. And so you have people that have read these books and they came to conclusions that are heresy, and they've created movements. And those movements claim that they're now the chosen people, and that they should come and take out the chosen people to prove their chosenness. So it's just important to see, like, we live in a world that, like, is built off of the premise of an understanding of the Torah that is just not correct. And they believe that the world is about externalities because of that. And this is why it's important to start with the soul before we get to, okay, this Africa, this, or this Spain, or returning of this. It's like, bro, like, people have to be prepared for Mashiach. They have to learn about who they are, like that they're a neshama, that this is their basis of their life. This is what they got to figure out. You have to learn from now that you understand that you have a neshama. Now you have to ask yourself, what's the neshama of the Torah? What's the neshama of this idea? What's the inner essence? Anyways, so we'll continue on. Mazel tov. We finished. We go into chapter 10, which, 10 is always a big number. So we'll see where he leads us with that. But we're just on this adventure together. We'll see.